Hello lovely folks. It's me in normal clothes. Yee. And the reason for this is because today I'm going to be doing a little bit of filming about the process of making some walnut dye. And I won't be able to do very much audio filming outside, I don't think, because the wind is ridiculous. So all you'll basically hear is whoosh the entire time. So thus the normal clothes, the clothes that you use for decorating and messy jobs, because walnut dye in the scale that I'm doing it today is quite dramatic. So I have started about 4 weeks ago with walnuts that I'd harvested last year, put into a bucket and left to ferment, which, as you can imagine, smells really good. You'll be glad smell-o-vision is not a thing because it's very stinky. But I've been told that leaving it to mature over the winter can make for a much stronger, redder dye. So we're going to test that out today. The goo itself is extremely dark already, but I need to dilute it down so that I can fit an entire blanket into it. So we are going to go downstairs and we're going to start the process of filtering it out. We are going to use, well, I'll show you in a minute. I shall wave them at you and go, and then record a little thing over the top. So, yeah, welcome to what Viking reenactment looks like behind the scenes when you are in your own garden trying something you haven't tried before. I'll say this, I've dyed with fresh walnuts before. I had really good results last year with that from this epic tree, which I'll show you in a minute. But this is the first time that I've ever overwintered the husks themselves. Never tried this before, so let's see how it goes. So, why am I doing this experiment? Well, firstly, to test the claim that overwintered wet walnut husks would produce a warmer, more reddish dye than heat-treated fresh walnut husks or dried and rehydrated ones. This is from a video that I watched a long time ago, and the chap believed that that was what had changed the colour of his dye. I'm not entirely convinced, but we're going to have a go and see. And secondly, to test how the dye stuff performs without the use of heat, as this will be really helpful to me for larger projects when I've got a lot of processing to do, because processing the husks properly takes a long time and I get a large crop every year to collect and prepare. And lastly, because standing in my garden stirring a big old vat of transformation potion is really fun. Okay, here we are, all set up and ready to begin. Now, if I bring you over here, what you can see is the bucket, which I filled absolutely full of walnut husks, whole ones just fallen off the tree, broken ones, bits and bobs, all the old bits and things that I didn't get round to harvesting and processing last year went into that bucket. So about 3 weeks ago, it got moved into this bucket, this massive box, because what I'm trying to do here is achieve enough dye to dye a full-size bed blanket. Basically, we've got a project in mind for it. So that is now, as you can see, absolutely gross, really stinky, but hopefully ready to be filtered. Now, these weren't put into the bucket dry, they were put in with just enough water to cover them, topped up occasionally all through the winter months just to make sure there was enough in there. I tried to use rainwater as much as I could. I haven't been able to collect as much as I wanted to because I didn't get around to it. I was hoping to do the whole lot in rainwater, but that's not possible. So we're going to be using some of our very hard tap water along with the rainwater that's in here. Now, as you can see, most of the walnuts, all of this, the green husk, I'll show you a picture in a minute of what they look like when they come off the tree. Bright green, and they gradually decay inside into this absolutely gross black goo. But this weird oiliness is exactly what we want for dyeing with. Now, when I'm using fresh, I'll husk them and I will pop them in a pan, heat them up for an hour or so gently, and then they're ready to dye with. This is a cold dye, so this isn't going to be heated at all in the process other than having been warmed by the sun while it's been sitting here fermenting. So we shall see how that goes. Now, I'll just show you some of the other equipment that I've got here. We have our initial bucket that is going to filter through first. So initially the mixture is going to go through this mesh. It's fine, but it's not incredibly fine. So we're going to filter it through this mesh into here, and then when it starts getting full, we're going to move into a sieve over here into this next bucket, and then finally the strained dye is going to go into this big empty one here. This is what I'm going to use for actually dyeing. These are absolutely fantastic for this sort of thing. Now, I haven't got my jug out yet. I need to go and grab that in a second. So what we're going to do is pop our gloves on and start with jugfuls from here into there, ready to dye, and see how we get on. See you in a bit. Before we get stuck in, here's a quick summary of the method that I'm using with this project. It's cold dyeing. No heat is applied other than the warmth of the sun on the container itself. The walnuts were collected and placed in the bucket along with some leaves, twigs, etc. with minimal preparation. This is testing the lazy way to dye with walnuts. The products were covered with water and left to slowly decompose over the winter. The dye stuffs were transferred into a deeper bath for a few weeks in the sun before I filtered them, and they're going to be double filtered, but not through a muslin, which is what I normally do with walnut dye, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. And so begins the process of scooping out the nasty goo. And it really is nasty at this point. Fresh walnuts have a very pungent smell when you're using them as a dye, but it's not a terrible smell. It's not, it doesn't make you feel slightly ill. Whereas these ones really are stinky, and that could be a problem later on. But for now, we're going to keep going and we're going to hope for the best. Okay, so we've got our first sieveful. You can see there, it's just what's left over is all the husks, leaves. You can dye with the leaves as well. They don't come out quite such a strong colour, but still very nice. So we're just going to leave that for a second. We're going to get our pokey thing and just move them about a bit. Try and get as much of that goo as we can to come downwards into the mixture. And then when it's sat for a minute or two, we're going to put this lumpy nastiness back in the bucket and water it again, because we might be able to get a second round of dye out of this. There's still, you can see these husky bits just there. There's still a lot of potential dye in this, so we'll get a lighter brown than we will from this first one, but it's well worth hanging on to. Be interesting in a bit to compare this to the dye that I actually processed last year. This is the stuff that I heated in a pan indoors, stunk my house out, sorry kids, and we'll see how that compares to this one, because what I'm hoping is to get the more reddish colour from this long slow process. Because there's no heating, it may not activate the tannins quite as much as the heated one does. No idea how it's going to work, but we'll see. Now you can see as I'm doing this, I'm wearing protective gloves, I've got old clothes on, and I'm doing it on a paved area of my garden. I'm avoiding getting it into the grass as much as possible, because the tannins in a dye like this, which is quite concentrated walnut dye, can kill grass. Walnut trees actually will suppress the growth of everything around them for up to 20 metres, because their leaves are so packed and their fruits are so packed with tannins. So you have to be very, very careful with the dye and dispose of it responsibly when you're finished. The pot's getting quite full now, so it won't be long before we move on to the next step. Ta-da! Okay, so after 2 full sievesfuls, what we've got is this liquor here. Now I'm going to filter that through the sieve into this other bucket here, and then it's going to go into the final dye bath over here. So I'm going to give my jug a rinse so that I can pour it nicely from one to the other without contaminating anything, and I'll be back in a mo. Okay, so we've just filtered out our final piece, and what you can see in that there is all the little bits and bobs that we're getting out with this next filter. When I'm doing wool, I often end up sieving it through a cloth as well, but I don't think I want to for this one because we want a more sort of rustic look with the final thing that we're going to dye with this one. And there we have a finished vat of dye. Now there are still some bits in there, but because this is such a large project, I'm not going to filter that again. I'm just going to test and see what happens if we don't filter it completely each time. What I would normally do with small batches is take this here sieve, lay a cloth through it and sieve the whole thing through a muslin cloth as well. And that takes out absolutely all the lumps and bumps, but I don't think it's necessary for this project. Now you can see there, that is all the goo that we filtered out of that initial mixture from that box there. I'm going to fill that back up with water and see if I can have another go another time. Now just important to note here, all of this that I'm using here is absolutely always kept just for dyeing. None of these things are things I use for food, and that's really, really important when you're dyeing, that you keep everything separate, because there's always traces of stuff left behind, and some of the dye stuffs are extremely poisonous. So be very, very careful and keep your utensils separate. You can use plastic buckets, you can use plastic boxes, you can use whatever you've got around. Make it work for you. Now, that is looking exceedingly murky and disturbing, which is what we want. So in a little bit, I'm going to show you what we're going to dye with it. I'm going to show you how much I'm going to dilute it so that I can make sure that all the dye particles have got enough room to move around the fabric. And we'll get started dyeing our blanket. Okay, so what I'm doing now is adding rather a lot of extra water to that dye bath. The reason I'm doing this is because we've got two quite large pieces of fabric to dye, and in order to spread the dye evenly throughout the fabric, it needs plenty of room to move. Diluting the dye won't change the intensity of the colour, but it does mean that you need to leave it longer for the most colour possible to attach to the fabric. The same quantity of dye is available, it's just when it's in a large vat it needs to have more time in order to come into contact with the fabric and bond. Duty calls, so this here rock is going to have to stand in for my hand for a minute. And here we have a close-up of the fabric that's going to go into the dye vat today. You can see that it's mostly this very pale cream colour. That's the colour of the entire piece that's going into the vat, as we cut the highly inauthentic, very dark black stripes off before we started. So it's a large amount of thick, lightly felted wool in a tabby weave. I haven't weighed it, we're kind of winging it on this one. It was given to me described as ready to dye, so I've gently rinsed it in a washing machine just to dampen it a little bit before dyeing. But I don't actually know if it's got any fabric softener on it or anything like that, because I've got to ask before it went in. No mordant was used pre-dyeing, as I want to see what the walnut husks can do on their own. This may mean lighter results, but the recipient is happy with a subtle shade if that's what appears. So off we go. Wow, look at that. Wow, that is looking really dark at the moment, but a lot of that will squeeze out. It's a very impressive looking result for the beginning, but please don't expect it to stay that dark, because it absolutely won't. So I am going to give this a really good dip, get it really well soaked, moved around a bit. Then I'm going to put the second one in. It's hard to tell, but that is actually incredibly heavy at this point. In goes number 2. When you're putting this stuff in a vat this big, it's important to try and get it as even as you can and get as much air out before you leave it, because air pockets and things like that can help make the final dye uneven. So we're going to give it a really, really good scroon. People laugh at me when I say that word. Does anybody else here say scroon for generally cleaning, rubbing things, giving them a good old scroon? It's something my nan used to say. It's bizarre, but comforting. Tell me in the comments if you've ever heard the word scroon before, whether it's just something my nan made up. Okay. And we are in. Now, if I pull this out, give it a squeeze. You can see there that it's already taking on some of the brown colour. Fantastic, and that's only been in for less than a minute at this point. So we're going to stir it for quite a while, try and get it absolutely lovely and mixed. I won't show you all of that. And we're then going to leave this to sit for as long as we feel like, really, at least 24 hours because it's a cold dye. I'll keep stirring it, I'll keep popping back and checking on it, and we will see what we get. Okay, this has been sitting for 4 days now. Been stirred about a couple of times a day every day, and we're just going to have a little look on day 4. So it looks extremely dark when you look at it like that. However, when you squeeze it, still quite a lot of that colour comes out. However, it's definitely doing something. So I think we're either going to do this later today and squeeze out as much of the dye as we can, and then give it a blooming good wash in the washing machine because it smells atrocious. It really does. And then see what we think afterwards. I'm actually quite happy with that, considering that it's cold dyed. It's quite a nice pale fawn colour. So I'm going to give this a good stir around, move it all about, and probably leave it just a little bit longer, see what we get tomorrow. Okay, it's day 5 and it is time to take this and wash it out. Now that colour has deepened again since yesterday, which is brilliant, exactly what we want to see. So we're going to take all of this out, give it a good squeeze and pop it in the washing machine for a rinse. See what we've got at the end. So I forgot to press record for the actual removal process. So instead, you can have this riveting footage of the washing machine going round and round and round. Spinny. Sorry about that, folks. Do, 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 do. And here we are. This is straight out of the machine. It's still damp at the moment. It doesn't look like very much from far away, but as you get closer and you actually see it compared to the initial fabric, it has actually done a pretty good job of dyeing. I'm quite surprised and quite pleased actually how well that's come out, considering there was so much fabric in that dye bath. Now, because that dye had been sitting for quite a while outside, I did use laundry cleanser in with the washing powder when it was washed, just to be on the safe side, because if I'd washed that too hot it would have shrunk a lot as well. And it was quite well fulled already. You can't see this, but I can feel it, but there's still some little bits of particulate matter in there. So it's going to stay on the line for a while. We'll see if just hanging can help get rid of them, and if not, it's going to go in the tumble dryer for a bit on a warmer cycle just to try and get rid of those. This is where that extra step of filtering through the muslin cloth can actually eliminate work at the other end, because these wouldn't be here if I'd used that extra filtration method. So the cold process did produce a functional dye. However, the result was somewhat lighter than I expected. I think the lack of heat really affected the activation of the tannins. There's always warnings when you're working with walnut dye not to overheat it, because that can really dull down your colour with the release of extra tannins. But I think in this case, it's definitely showing that it hasn't had that additional process added onto it. Now, the dye doesn't appear to have a more reddish coloration for being overwintered. However, the paleness of the result could make that more difficult to see. Happily, the intended recipient of this project is really pleased with it and absolutely happy with the pale fawn colour that we've achieved. So, yay! If it had been for me, I think I might have left it in even longer and just risked leaving it outside all that time to see what happened. And here we are, finished. It's now dry. It's had a little go in the tumble dryer. Between that and hanging outside in the wind, it's got rid of most of those little bitty bits. There's no texture to it anymore. Really happy with the final colour. Lovely jubbly. Just before we go, I'm going to share a few conclusions that I've come to through this process that will guide how I do my next large walnut dye project. Firstly, I'm absolutely going to do my own fabric prep in the future, as I don't know if any fabric softener affected the uptake of this dye. Usually I do it all myself anyway. This was kind of an outlier for me. Usually I'm washing well, prepping, mordanting, getting all the fabric ready in the normal way, but this was a little bit different this time. But that's a lesson learned for the future. Also, the final filter through muslin that I normally do with my dyes is worth it. I had wondered if it was overkill, but with walnut dye, certainly, it definitely has its benefits. Cold dyeing with minimal prep like this works. It's less effort, but my normal process of husking, heating and cooling before straining is much less stinky and produces a deeper colour, so hands down, that's the winner. I've also figured out I can combine that more detailed prep with a longer soak in the vat for larger items like this for better results in the future. Investment of more time does indeed equal greater reward. If you fancy a go at this walnut dyeing, it's almost time. The season is beginning, the walnuts are starting to drop, and I have buckets at the ready to collect mine. If you do have a go, let me know how you got on. And as always, if you've got any comments or questions, pop them down there or come and find me on Facebook. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I had absolutely no idea how it was going to turn out when I started. I kind of was hoping for something a little bit stronger, but I'm actually really happy with that result. And I've had a really good time making it as well. As I said before, standing in my garden, stirring large vats of transformation potion is rather good fun. I know this video isn't quite what you've come to expect on this channel, but I hope that you've enjoyed it anyway. Let me know if you have. If you want to see more of my random behind the scenes experimental videos, then let me know. I can certainly do more of those. Okay folks, have an absolutely brilliant day and I will see you soon with another groovy video. Bye.